Modern agriculture did not collapse suddenly. It did not wake up one day and decide to damage the land. It evolved, slowly, quietly, decision by decision. Most of those decisions were made with urgency, not malice. They were shaped by fear, by pressure, by the constant threat of shortage. To understand modern agriculture, we must first understand the world that created it. For most of human history, food insecurity was normal. Famine was not a rare disaster. It was a recurring condition. Entire civilizations rose and fell based on their ability to feed themselves. When harvests failed, societies fractured. When food was scarce, conflict followed. This reality shaped political thinking for centuries. So when the 20th century arrived, carrying industrialization, urban expansion, and rapid population growth, governments faced a problem they could not ignore. How do you feed millions of people who no longer produce their own food? Not occasionally, not in good years, every year, at scale. Agriculture was no longer a rural concern. It became a strategic system. Food security became national security. And with that shift came a new priority: predictability. Nature, with all its complexity and variability, suddenly felt dangerous. Rain was unreliable, soil was inconsistent, biology was slow, the margin for error disappeared. This is where the mindset changed. The question was no longer, how do we adapt to natural systems? It became, how do we control outcomes? Control promised safety, control promised stability, control promised scale, and control required simplification. Complex systems are hard to manage. They resist prediction. They behave differently under stress. So complexity had to be reduced. Biological diversity was replaced with uniformity. Local knowledge was replaced with standardized recommendations. Observation was replaced with measurement. This shift was not accidental. It was institutional. Universities adapted their research priorities. Governments aligned subsidies with production targets. Industries emerged to supply solutions at scale. Agriculture began to resemble manufacturing. Inputs went in, outputs came out. If output declined, inputs increased. This logic worked. For a time, yields rose dramatically. Food became cheaper. Availability improved. From the outside, the system appeared successful. And this success reinforced the belief that control was the correct path. But control always comes with a trade. When systems are simplified, they lose redundancy. When redundancy disappears, resilience weakens. Modern agriculture did not fail because it was inefficient. It failed because it was too efficient in the wrong direction. It optimized production, not stability. It optimized output, not regeneration. And most importantly, it optimized short-term predictability at the expense of long-term adaptability. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural observation. The system we inherited today was not designed to heal itself. It was designed to perform. And performance can be measured. Health cannot. That distinction is the foundation of everything that follows. Because once a system values performance above resilience, every solution moves in the same direction. More inputs, more control, more dependency. The lie of modern agriculture does not begin with chemicals. It begins with the belief that complexity is a problem to be eliminated. In the next part, we will look at what agriculture looked like before control became the goal. Not to romanticize it, but to understand what was replaced. Before agriculture became an industrial system, it was something very different. Not primitive, not simplistic, just slower. Farming systems evolved alongside local environments. They were shaped by climate, soil type, water availability, and tradition. There was no universal formula. What worked in one region often failed completely in another. This forced farmers to observe, to experiment, to adapt. Knowledge was not centralized. It was distributed, passed through generations, refined by failure, and grounded in direct experience. Inputs existed, but they were biological and cyclical. Animals provided nutrients, crop residues returned to the soil. Diversity reduced pest pressure naturally. Nothing happened quickly, and that slowness mattered. Time allowed systems to recover. Mistakes did not instantly cascade into collapse. If one crop failed, another often survived. If yields dropped, soils could rebuild. These systems were inefficient by modern metrics. They required labor, they demanded patience, but they possessed something modern systems struggle to maintain: internal balance. Productivity was tied to biological processes, not to replacement. Fertility came from organic matter accumulation. Structure came from roots and soil life. Resilience came from diversity. This does not mean pre-industrial agriculture was ideal. Yields were limited, Food shortages still occurred, labor demands were intense, but the system functioned as a whole. Problems were visible, feedback was immediate. When soils degraded, farmers noticed. When biodiversity declined, consequences followed quickly. Nothing masked failure. There was no external system to compensate, no chemical intervention to delay consequences, no economic buffer to absorb losses indefinitely. This forced alignment. Farming practices had to respect biological limits because those limits were unavoidable. This alignment between human activity and natural processes is what industrial agriculture eventually disrupted. Not because it was wrong, but because it was slow. As population increased and cities expanded, this slowness became unacceptable. Governments needed scale, markets needed consistency, and biological systems, by nature, resist both. So instead of adapting demands to biology, biology was adapted to demand. Or replaced. This transition did not happen overnight. It happened gradually. Tools were added first. Fertilizers supplemented natural fertility. Chemicals reduced losses during bad years. At this stage, the system was still balanced. Inputs supported biology. They did not replace it. But support slowly turned into reliance. As yields increased, expectations rose. What was once a good year became the new baseline. Farms were redesigned around higher outputs. Crop varieties were selected for responsiveness, not resilience. Soils were managed for production, not regeneration. Biology became secondary. At this point, the system crossed a threshold. It was no longer anchored in internal cycles. It was anchored in external inputs. The feedback loop changed. Instead of asking, "What is the soil telling us?" the system asked, "What do we need to add?" This shift altered not just practices, but perception. Soil stopped being seen as a living system. It became a medium, a platform, something to hold plants upright while inputs did the real work. This mindset did not come from ignorance. It came from success. The system delivered results, and results justified expansion. But success can be misleading. It hides fragility. Pre-industrial agriculture failed loudly. Modern agriculture fails quietly. That difference matters, because quiet failure allows problems to accumulate beneath the surface. And by the time they become visible, they are far harder to reverse. Understanding what agriculture looked like before control is not about returning to the past. It is about recognizing what was lost when control became the primary goal. In the next part, we will examine the promise that accelerated this transition. Efficiency, and why efficiency when pushed too far. By this point, one uncomfortable question always emerges. If no-till improves soil structure, reduces erosion, and conserves moisture, why do so many farmers try it and abandon it? The answer is simple and brutal. No-till is not a single practice. It is a system, and systems punish shortcuts. Most no-till failures happen for three main reasons: poor transition management, misunderstanding of biology, and unrealistic expectations. The transition phase is where most people lose patience. Soil that has been tilled for decades does not magically behave like healthy soil in year one. Compaction layers exist. Biological activity is low. Aggregate stability is weak. Water infiltration is inconsistent. In this phase, yields can stagnate or even drop slightly. This is where the myth begins. Farmers switch to no-till, keep the same crop rotation, the same fertility strategy, the same weed control logic, and expect different results. When that doesn't happen, the conclusion is immediate: no-till doesn't work here. But the soil never agreed to that experiment. No-till demands a redesign of thinking. Residue is no longer waste. It becomes armor. Roots are no longer just nutrient extractors. They are soil engineers. Microbes are no longer invisible. They become partners, whether the farmer likes it or not. Another common failure point is compaction mismanagement. No-till does not mean no action. It means targeted action. Traffic control becomes critical. Equipment weight distribution matters. Running heavy machinery on wet soil can undo years of biological progress in a single afternoon. Then there is weed pressure. Critics love to point out that no-till increases herbicide dependency. That claim is not entirely false, but it is dangerously incomplete. In simplified no-till systems with poor rotations, yes, herbicide reliance increases. In diversified systems, the opposite often happens over time. Cover crops disrupt weed cycles. Residue suppresses germination. Soil biology competes with weed seeds. But this takes time, and time is not something most operations budget for psychologically. Expectation management is the silent killer. No-till is often marketed as a shortcut to sustainability. It is not. It is a long-term investment with delayed returns. Farmers who adopt it for cost savings alone usually quit. Farmers who adopt it to build resilience tend to persist. There is also a geographic reality that gets ignored in online debates. Climate matters. Soil texture matters. Rainfall patterns matter. No-till in a poorly drained clay soil behaves differently than in a well-structured loam. Pretending otherwise is lazy analysis. The farmers who succeed with no-till do not blindly follow rules. They observe, they adapt, they accept that the soil is not a machine, but a living system with inertia. And that brings us to the core misunderstanding. No-till is not about never touching the soil. It is about disturbing it as little as possible, as strategically as necessary. Once that distinction is understood, the conversation changes completely. When people talk about soil, they usually talk about chemistry first. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pH, CEC. That focus makes sense. Chemistry is measurable. It fits spreadsheets. It responds quickly to inputs. Biology does not. And because biology is slow, complex, and stubbornly difficult to control, modern agriculture learned to ignore it. That decision shaped everything that followed. Soil biology is not a bonus feature of healthy soil. It is the engine. Without biological activity, soil is just a growing medium, a substrate, something crops tolerate, not something they interact with. The moment tillage becomes constant, that engine is damaged repeatedly. Fungal networks are broken, habitat collapses, organic matter is exposed to oxygen and decomposes faster than it can be rebuilt. At first, this does not look like a problem. Yields stay high, sometimes they increase. Why? Because chemistry compensates. Synthetic nitrogen replaces microbial mineralization. Soluble phosphorus replaces fungal transport. Potassium replaces cation cycling. The system works, but only as long as inputs continue. This is the core trade-off modern agriculture made, often without realizing it. Instead of feeding biology and letting biology feed plants, the system chose to feed plants directly. Efficient, predictable, profitable, and biologically bankrupt. In a biologically active soil, roots are not alone. They exist inside a massive underground economy. Plants release sugars through their roots. Those sugars feed bacteria and fungi. In return, microbes deliver nutrients, water, and protection. This is not poetic language. It is measurable science. Mycorrhizal fungi extend the effective root system by several 100%. They access phosphorus that roots physically cannot reach. They transport micronutrients. They improve soil aggregation. Tillage disrupts this relationship instantly. One aggressive pass with a disc can destroy fungal networks that took months or years to establish. And unlike weeds, fungi do not bounce back overnight. Bacteria respond faster, but they are also sensitive. Compaction limits oxygen. Chemical imbalances suppress populations. Repeated disturbance selects for survival, not efficiency. Over time, the soil food web simplifies. Less diversity, less redundancy, less resilience. This is why two soils with identical chemical tests can perform very differently under stress. One has biological depth, the other does not. No-till, when done correctly, creates the conditions biology needs to return. Residue moderates temperature. Roots remain in the ground longer. Fungal networks stay intact. Carbon inputs increase. But here is the part that makes people uncomfortable. Biology does not care about ideology. It does not care if a system is labeled conventional, regenerative, organic, or high-tech. It responds only to conditions. If residue is removed, biology slows. If roots are absent, biology starves. If disturbance is constant, biology retreats. This is why no-till without crop diversity often disappoints. Biology needs continuous feeding. A single crop, even without tillage, creates long periods of starvation underground. Roots matter more than residue. Living roots matter more than dead ones. Cover crops are not trendy accessories. They are biological bridges. They keep the underground economy alive when cash crops are gone. And this leads to a critical realization. No-till alone does not regenerate soil. It only removes one source of damage. Regeneration happens when removal of damage is combined with active rebuilding. That distinction is where most debates collapse. In the next part, we'll talk about carbon, why it is misunderstood, why soil organic matter is not just a percentage, and why chasing numbers often leads farmers in the wrong direction. Carbon became the symbol of soil health because it is visible on a lab report. One number, one percentage, easy to compare, easy to market, and deeply misunderstood. Soil organic carbon is not a trophy. It is a process indicator. When farmers are told to increase organic matter, the assumption is linear. Add residue, add compost, add cover crops, and the number goes up. Sometimes it does, often it doesn't, or it moves so slowly that it feels broken. This leads to frustration and bad conclusions. The problem is that soil carbon does not behave like money in a bank account. You cannot just deposit more and expect it to stay. Carbon is constantly moving. Plants fix carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. That carbon enters the soil mainly through roots, not residue. Microbes consume it. Some of it is respired back into the atmosphere. Some becomes microbial biomass. A very small fraction becomes stabilized organic matter. That last fraction is what soil tests measure. And that fraction is heavily influenced by soil texture, mineralogy, climate, and historical management. Two fields with identical practices can show very different carbon levels for decades. This is where the narrative gets dangerous. Farmers start chasing the number instead of the function. They add inputs designed to raise organic matter quickly. Manure, compost, amendments. Some of these help. Some only inflate short-term measurements without improving structure or biology. In some cases, they increase respiration more than stabilization. Carbon goes in, microbes explode, carbon goes back out. The soil looks busy, the system looks active, but resilience does not improve. Stable carbon is not about quantity alone. It is about protection. Carbon persists in soil when it is physically protected inside aggregates, chemically bound to minerals, or biologically recycled into complex compounds. Tillage breaks aggregates. Bare soil accelerates oxidation. Simplified rotations limit carbon chemistry diversity. This is why no-till helps, but does not guarantee success. Without roots, carbon input is episodic. Without diversity, carbon quality is narrow. Without structure, carbon leaks. The most resilient soils are not the ones with the highest organic matter numbers. They are the ones where carbon is actively cycling while remaining partially protected. This is hard to measure. It is even harder to explain, which is why marketing prefers the number. Another uncomfortable truth: carbon accumulation is slow. Painfully slow. In many climates, realistic increases are measured in tenths of a percent per decade, not per season. Anyone promising rapid soil carbon transformation without trade-offs is selling a story, not agronomy. That does not mean regeneration is fake. It means it is biological, not mechanical. The role of no-till here is simple but critical. It reduces carbon loss. It protects aggregates. It allows fungal networks to persist. But the real driver is living roots. Roots leak carbon continuously. They feed microbes daily. They create microenvironments where stabilization can occur. Residue helps, but roots do the heavy lifting. This is why systems with aggressive cover crop integration often outperform residue-heavy systems with long fallow periods. Carbon follows life, and this brings us to the next layer of the conversation, one that usually gets hijacked by ideology. Inputs. Are fertilizers and chemicals inherently anti-regenerative? Or is the real issue how, when, and why they are used? That's where the debate stops being theoretical and starts affecting real decisions on real farms. Next part, we dismantle the false binary between chemical and biological agriculture, and why that argument keeps farmers stuck instead of moving forward. Modern agriculture loves simple enemies. Chemicals became one of them. The story usually goes like this: fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides destroyed the soil, killed biology, and trapped farmers in dependency. Therefore, removing chemicals will automatically restore balance. That narrative is emotionally satisfying. It is also incomplete. Chemistry did not ruin agriculture by existing. It became destructive when it replaced biological processes instead of supporting them. Plants have always interacted with chemistry. Nutrients are chemical by nature. Nitrogen is nitrogen whether it comes from a legume, manure, or a factory. The difference is not the molecule. It is the pathway. When nutrients arrive slowly, biologically mediated, and in sync with plant demand, the system remains stable. When they arrive fast, concentrated, and disconnected from biological cycles, imbalances appear. That is not ideology. That is kinetics. The problem is not fertilizer. The problem is fertilizer as a substitute for soil function. When nitrogen replaces microbial mineralization year after year, microbes lose relevance. When phosphorus is delivered in soluble form season after season, fungal partnerships weaken. When potassium is pushed aggressively, cation balance shifts. The system still produces, but it becomes fragile. Biological farming, on the other hand, often makes the opposite mistake. It treats chemistry as corruption rather than a tool. Nutrient deficiencies are ignored, yield losses are rationalized, stress is romanticized as natural. Plants do not care about philosophy. They care about access. A biologically active soil with severe nutrient limitations will not magically compensate through goodwill. Biology needs raw materials. Carbon alone does not build proteins. This is why the chemical versus biological debate traps farmers in false choices. High-performing systems integrate both. Fertilizers are used as corrections, not crutches. Biology is fed and protected, not expected to perform miracles. Inputs are timed to minimize disruption and maximize uptake. In successful no-till systems, fertilizer rates often decrease over time, not because farmers reject chemistry, but because biology takes over part of the workload. This transition is gradual. Trying to remove inputs too fast often collapses yield before biology is ready to compensate. That failure then gets blamed on regenerative practices, reinforcing skepticism. The irony is that the most biologically active farms in the world still use chemistry. They just use it differently. Precision matters, placement matters, timing matters, context matters. Spraying becomes targeted, not habitual. Fertility becomes strategic, not blanket. Decisions are driven by observation, not doctrine. This is where modern technology could have been an ally. Instead, it often became an amplifier of excess. GPS, variable rate, sensors, and models were meant to increase efficiency. In many cases, they increased application confidence instead. If a system is flawed, optimizing it just makes the flaw more consistent. The future does not belong to purely chemical or purely biological agriculture. It belongs to systems that understand both deeply and apply each with restraint. Restraint is not weakness, it is intelligence. And restraint leads us to the next uncomfortable topic: economics. Because no system survives if it does not pay the bills. And many regenerative conversations collapse the moment profit enters the room. In the next part, we'll examine the economic reality of no-till and regenerative systems, why some farms thrive financially while others struggle, and why short-term accounting often hides long-term risk. Economics is often the silent dictator of farm decisions. The most elegant biological plan is irrelevant if the balance sheet turns red. Farmers cannot negotiate with ideology, they negotiate with cash flow, debt service, and market volatility. No-till and regenerative systems promise long-term soil health, but the upfront investment can be punishing. Cover crops, specialized equipment, inoculants, and monitoring technologies are not free. Transitioning fields from conventional to regenerative is a multi-year process, during which yields may dip and expenses rise. Yet, the story is more nuanced than biology costs, chemistry pays. Financially successful farms understand timing, scale, and risk management. They stagger transitions, integrate corrective inputs to prevent collapse, and leverage technology to reduce waste. Subsidies and incentives can help, but profit ultimately depends on disciplined execution. Misalignment between philosophy and finance is the fastest way to fail. Markets complicate the picture. Commodity prices fluctuate unpredictably. A farm that invests in regenerative practices today may face a sudden price drop tomorrow. Without resilience in both biological and financial systems, a single year of bad economics can erase gains made over a decade. The lesson is clear. Strategy cannot exist in a vacuum. Biology, technology, and finance must operate as a coordinated system. Labor and knowledge are just as critical as economics. Modern agriculture has become more cognitively demanding. Machines automate physical tasks, but humans must manage complexity, calibrate sensors, interpret data, adjust inputs, and anticipate risk. Misunderstanding the interplay between chemical corrections and biological cycles can negate years of careful work. Education and mentorship matter more than ideology. Farmers who succeed are constantly observing, measuring, and questioning assumptions. Soil tests, tissue tests, crop models, and historical performance are interpreted contextually, not blindly followed. Knowledge replaces guesswork, and observation trumps dogma. Scaling regenerative practices introduces additional complexity. Practices that work on a small plot do not always translate to hundreds or thousands of acres. Logistics, machinery capacity, timing windows, labor coordination become bottlenecks. Precision is not optional. Without it, inputs are wasted, biology is disrupted, and both economic and agronomic performance suffer. The underlying principle remains. Systems thinking is more valuable than single solution thinking. One tool alone, whether chemical, mechanical, or biological, cannot sustain productivity. Integration, adaptation, and iteration define long-term success. Risk management is the hidden backbone of high-performing farms. Weather variability, pest outbreaks, and market swings are inevitable. Resilient systems buffer shocks through diversity, redundancy, and strategic flexibility. Cover crops, crop rotations, intercropping, and diversified input strategies spread risk. Chemical inputs are deployed as targeted interventions, not routine crutches. Biological systems are nurtured, not expected to perform miracles. Timing and context remain decisive. Fertilizers applied at the wrong growth stage can reduce uptake efficiency, leach into waterways, or disrupt microbial networks. Pest control interventions applied too early or too broadly can kill beneficial species while leaving target populations unaffected. Successful operators adjust constantly, informed by observation, sensors, and historical patterns. The convergence of biology, chemistry, economics, and technology defines the modern frontier. Each element amplifies or limits the others. Ignoring any dimension introduces fragility. Yield may hold temporarily, but the system accumulates stress, debt, or biological imbalance over time. Real resilience emerges only when every input, financial, chemical, biological, technological, is applied judiciously, and every decision is contextual rather than doctrinal.